And we are live. Crazy times, internet streaming. Hi, everyone. This is like the informal introduction. Um, this is gonna go in the recording, so I say stuff. I'm François at Snipcart, the CEO. Dude, I'm with my friend and colleague and Snipcart co-founder Charles Willett, who is
Hi,
a
everyone.
beautiful human being. I'm so glad to be seeing him today. And then another beautiful human being, we have Colby in the house. Colby is a good friend. I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, hey everybody. I'm a developer advocate at Apple Tools, and I also do a lot of community and tutorial work on the side. And I love Next.js, so I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, cool. So, for those of you who just joined, I see some folks are popping up in the chat. That's great. This is our very first webinar at Snipcart. We wanted this to be useful, not about Snipcart necessarily, but like our content. And we also wanted this to be like informal, right? So for those who are already here, the format will be something like Colby takes over, Charles and I are booed off the stage, and then he's got some nifty slides to to talk about Next.js, and he's going to run you through it. Like what is Next.js? How does it compare to Gatsby? Whole bunch of other stuff. He's got the street cred to be talking about Next.js. He's done quite a few projects with it. On that note, Colby, do you want to plug the stuff you've been working on for Next.js? I think you have courses, you got some stuff, and it's yeah, you go for it.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah, I've been one of my favorite projects with Next.js that I've been working on is a WordPress starter, and like my little challenge and goal with it is to bring a full WordPress site into Next.js, and I'm doing it statically too. So like as we'll get into the slides, like there's a lot of different pieces with Next.js, but part of my challenge was to make it static. So I'll also highlight that a little bit at the end and show it a little bit, but that's probably my favorite thing that I've been working on.
Cool. Yeah, for sure. We'll link to that in the chat. We'll follow up via email with everyone who attended. Listen, so the word on the street is you should expect like half of your attendees to show up, your subscribed attendees to show up. So right now we're at less than half. So the Snipcart mob, I am thoroughly disappointed. You're not respecting the stats. But no, jokes aside, there's already 30 people here, and that's more than enough to have a good conversation. And I'm so thankful that some of y'all joined. It's it's our first one, so we were like, yeah, is this gonna work? Is this gonna be a fluke? We'll see. So let's see here. It's 2:06, at least where I'm from. So in EST, we're gonna wait 4 minutes to give time to some people to roll up. And then we'll let Colby get started. In the meantime, I would very much like y'all to consider questions in the let's get this the widget just right on the right of the chat, on your right side. If you have any questions, that feature in the app that we're using lets you ask questions. We can like display them on the screen and then interact regarding that particular topic. So if you want to stack questions, just do it. We'll do our best to answer all of them. Hopefully, the team and I have a few questions for Colby if that stack of questions ends up being dry. So yeah, the format will be Colby talking about Next.js, his slides for maybe around 20 minutes. And then we're going to do like a family Q&A, like something very laid back where we're going to talk about Next.js. Of course, we're the Snipcart team. If you have questions about Snipcart, we're not going to shut you off, right? We're going to engage with you regarding this. And that's pretty much it. I mean, Ludo's in the chat. I don't think I'm forgetting any bells and whistles or features or whatever. I would very much like Charles to tell us why there is alcohol behind him if this is his work office. I would expect more professionalism from a co-founder of a successful, profitable startup. What's going on here, Charles?
Yeah, actually, I kind of like the bottles. So it's like the only decoration that I have in my office. And the fun fact is that I don't think I opened the bottle for like at least 2 or 3 months, but I just like to collect them and try to showcase them. And I had some like weird shelves in my office that I had to find a purpose for them. So why not showcase my bottles?
You were focused on the alcohol bottles. I was focused on the keyboard. I was hoping to get some background music here.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I just got that keyboard for Christmas and I played like 3 or 4 times. So I don't think you want to hear me playing, but it's still like
Next
a work
time.
in progress. Yeah. Yeah. I hope so.
Who gave you a keyboard for Christmas, Charles?
My father and my mother, they,
Wow.
I told them that I wanted to like learn something new and maybe learn piano. So I just bought a course on like Udemy, something like that. And I figured that I was good at typing on my keyboard, so maybe piano will be easy, but then that's not the case.
Okay. And then, all right, man. Colby, do you do any kind of music? Because you got that studio vibe going on your end.
Oh, I used to, like, back in the day in like high school and college, I played guitar for a while, but it's one of those things that's just kind of sat under my bed for a while, and I wish I played more, but it's just, I don't know, I never think to get it out.
Yeah, got it. Well, it is 2:09. I think we've waited long enough for people to get in, and there will be a recording available. And even if they get in midway, they're still going to get some value and some fun from the whole shtick. So what I suggest is Colby sharing your screen and taking over, and Charles and I will how can I GTFO from here?
I don't know how to leave the stage either.
Of course.
Cool. Well, it looks like I can't hear you all anymore, but I think that's okay. So, hey, everybody. Today, we're going to talk about Next.js and WTF it is. So who am I? I'm Colby Fayock. I'm a developer advocate at Apple Tools, and I'm the one hugging BB-8 and Kylo Ren over there. You can find me pretty much anywhere on the web by just Googling my name, as I'm the only one in the world. So let's start off with the Great Framework Wars. There's been many such wars over the history of the web, but we're going to focus on somewhat modern times. With traditional serverless stacks, you have frameworks like Rails, Django, and Laravel, where with Rails, you get a whole suite of features on top of Ruby that gets you moving quickly with a complex web application. But before we dive too deep into those tools, are we really here to talk about serverless frameworks? There's a little bit of a wink there, but let's move on. We're going to focus more on the JavaScript side of things. While there are a ton of UI libraries out there that do some really great things, 4 of the biggest ones really come down to React, Angular, Vue, and Svelte. While these libraries aren't really frameworks in themselves, they are the core of what modern frameworks are built upon. React is easily by far the most popular framework. It was created by Facebook to solve challenges with their own interfaces. While it had some mixed reactions when it was first released, it has built a lot of momentum, and it's built that momentum really fast. It led to the creation of frameworks that sit on top of React, like Gatsby and Next.js. These frameworks really paved the way for what we would expect today out of a modern JavaScript web framework, where Gatsby has championed static site generation built on top of React, where Next.js feels like it focused on building powerful APIs on top of React, which also includes static generation among some other options. But to me, Next.js almost feels like a super-powered extension of Create React App, where Gatsby seems like it's a little bit more of its own thing. Angular has a little bit of a weird past with its initial release and rewriting, which leading to what it is today. It was developed by teams at Google, where for a while it was pretty easy to be confused about whether someone was actually talking about Angular or AngularJS within the context of a conversation. But it's still a very popular library for building UIs. It hasn't really emerged, though, as a large competitor in the framework wars. It doesn't have quite the variety of frameworks like the others. Maybe it's because Angular has a little bit more built in opposed to React. It has some more opinionated ways of doing things, but either way, Scully really is the only one that's caught momentum in that world. Vue.js is a fan favorite. It was created by Evan You after gaining some experience working with Angular at Google. It tackles the challenges of building UIs in a bit different way than React does. The original goal was to be a lighter weight version of Angular. It's led to some promising frameworks that sit on top of it, like Gridsome, VuePress, and Next.js. And that's Next with a U, not to be confused with Next. But for those of you who prefer the syntax of Vue, you have a lot of options. And Next.js got its name with the idea that it's like Next.js, but for Vue. VuePress tries to go more minimal, where you can get a static site running with little configuration. And you have Gridsome, which is probably closer to a Gatsby. And then you have Svelte. Svelte was built by Rich Harris, who does graphic work for the New York Times. It takes a bit different approach from the others, where it doesn't really ship a framework, but it instead ships the code that's needed to manipulate the DOM. Similar to Angular, Svelte doesn't really have a whole lot of weight in the framework wars, but people absolutely love Svelte. I fully expect it to continue to quickly grow. It promises and delivers great performance. There are also a ton of other frameworks that do a lot of great things. Like you have Redwood and Blitz, where they're both looking to provide a more Rails-like development experience. Or you have others like Bridgetown, which is Ruby-powered, Hugo, which is built on top of Go, Eleveny, which is on Node, and even our old friend Jekyll. But as you would suspect, we're going to focus on React for this session. Particularly, we're going to look at Next.js. We'll talk a little bit about its history along with how it works. We'll also talk a bit about how Next.js fits in and how it compares to other React-based frameworks like Gatsby. So going back to October of 2016, version 1.0 of Next.js was released. Before that, it was a library of Node.js extensions first published in 2011. At least that's what was on NPM. But with version 1.0, Next.js was looking to be the solution for universal JavaScript applications. Next.js was created by a company called Zeit. You're probably more familiar with the name Vercel, though, which is what they rebranded to in April of 2020. But their goal was to create truly universal React JavaScript applications for the web. And what they meant by a universal JavaScript app is they wanted to be able to include both anything rendering on the server and also anything that's happening inside of the browser, all within the same lifecycle. This is a beautiful thing, because if I wanted to render my code server-side or even static, and then adding all the bits that are important to get my visitor as quickly as possible, then once it loads, I can add in any highly dynamic bits that need to be added directly inside the browser, like client-side requests or animations. I don't have to maintain incredibly complex setups to do that. I can manage that all within one code base and in an intuitive way, in a universal way. Digging into some of the features of that first release, it came with things that you'd still expect today, like a file system-based routing, just maybe lacking a few features since it's really been a couple years since that time. When creating new pages with file system-based routing, though, I can name my file whatever I want that route to be. So if I wanted to create a page that's loaded at /contact, I would create a file named contact.js inside of my pages directory. The same goes for any route, even nested routes. They also championed data fetching methods that lived close to the page component it was being used in. While this might not look as familiar if you've only been using Next.js for a little while, getInitialProps was the primary way to fetch data. You would return a promise or set it up as an async function. And inside that function, you would handle your request for the data that you want to start off the page with when it loads. And finally, they did all of this with promising performance wins built right into the framework. Most of these things are kind of expected to be in frameworks now, but at the same time, at that time, some of the things that you'd have to manually set up, which was a pain. So getting this out of the box was really amazing. Skipping ahead to today, while Next.js is built upon the same foundation, the team has put a lot of effort into listening to the community and meticulously developing APIs to help devs get productive. While server-side rendering is still available for developers, you now have a few more options for how your site gets served to your visitors. Traditionally, every time someone visited your site hits a server. That server would render the page and return it to the browser. This is called server-side rendering, or SSR for short. It's important to stay on top of your acronym game here. But now you also have the ability to statically compile your site. Instead of hitting the server, your visitors hit the browser to directly hit static storage. This is called static site generation, or SSG. Next.js knows your routes ahead of time. So both from its file system API and any additional routes that you define, you can compile those routes out and then dump everything into static storage. Taking that a step further, though, Next.js also has a hybrid approach, which is called incremental static regeneration, or ISR. At the core of it, Next.js will hit a server to fulfill requests. The interesting thing about this approach, though, is anytime someone hits that server is going to fulfill that request from static storage, meaning you'll get a lot of the same benefits that you would with static storage. But if that page is stale, Next.js will refresh that site in the background, regenerating that page and stashing it back into storage. We'll get into how that works in a few minutes here, but the goal is to provide the benefits of static storage while being able to keep your content up to date. From a routing point of view, the same concepts kind of apply, but we now have ways to set dynamic parameters, meaning we can more easily manage dynamic routes based off of our file names. Using the bracket notation inside of a file name, we tell Next.js that it's a dynamic value. When we fetch our data, Next.js gives us that value as a parameter. We can then use that parameter when creating the routes that are available inside of our application. And then we can use that parameter value to look up the data for each of those pages. We can even use the spread operator to define a catch-all route. In this example, any after the products would be available as a parameter inside of our page. That way, if we wanted to have a product page by ID, but also have multiple page types available for that ID, Next.js makes that available as an array. So we can have deeply nested dynamic routes, again, using those parameters to navigate to the page and the correct data. We also have a lot more options for fetching data, where we have an option of choosing between server-side and statically generated sites. If we're looking to render data on our server, meaning anytime we make a page request or server renders our page, we can use get server-side props. This feels a little bit more like a traditional serverless stack, hence my wink earlier in the talk. But we're able to keep all this within React and Next.js, where we can serve dynamic sessions right to the browser. On the other hand, if we're only serving static content to the browser, we can use getStaticProps. If Next.js detects that you're only using getStaticProps, it will consider that page static and store it as such. Now, as we discussed a little bit earlier, Next.js also offers a hybrid approach. With incremental static regeneration, we can get the best of both worlds. If we add this revalidate property to our return object, we're telling Next.js that we want to refresh that page every 1 second. If we take a quick look back at our diagram that I promised you that I would explain, our visitor is hitting a server and receiving a static file. But every 1 second, or whatever number we define here under revalidate, Next.js is going to go off in the background, and it's going to regenerate that page and stick it into static storage. We're able to defend ourselves against high volume traffic hitting dynamic routes, while keeping that page updated with the latest information. Whichever data fetching method we choose, ultimately that data is going to end up as props, which the name of the functions might have given it away, but those props will be available on our page component, which at that point, we can use it just like we would any other data inside of a React component. The nice thing about all these different options, though, is Next.js will tell you exactly what it's doing with its logs. In this example, we can see that our homepage and 404 page are built out statically. Similar to what you get with the default Next.js starter, we also see the Lambda symbol, which means that it's server-side code. Particularly in this function designated by the /API prefix. For instance, if my homepage used get server-side props, it would have that same symbol. But as Next.js goes to build your site, it will determine what data fetching APIs you're using and render the page statically or dynamically based off of that. And that's not where it stops. Next.js has continued to listen to the community and push forward on feature development. It's provided developers more APIs baked right into the web framework. Similar to the file system-based page routing, Next.js can also be used to create serverless functions. If you're not familiar with serverless functions, the code looks exactly like a JavaScript function because, well, it is. Well, where inside of your handler, you have a request and a response argument where you can grab details about the request, then fire the response callback whenever you're ready to send an answer to that request. And it's just an easy way to manage server-side code in a scalable way. While they don't really support an official community-based plugin ecosystem, they've developed a number of opinionated components and plugins, such as their Next Image component. It provides a ton of benefits out of the box, like converting into modern formats like WebP. It also has image optimization, and it even allows you to give them responsive sizes. And if you're familiar with React Helmet, Next.js ships its own solution to manage the head of an HTML document. While I think some of the features are missing from React Helmet, it mostly does the same thing, allowing you to manage your meta and your asset tags easily throughout the project. There's also a whole lot of other features, and here's just another few of them. It has built-in CSS support, which is pretty common, but you can add CSS modules out of the box, and Sass, which is my favorite, with no config by just installing the package. It has TypeScript for those of you who can't live without it, and it's baked right in, but not required. It also polyfills the Fetch API, both in the browser and on the server, allowing us to not have to worry about support for the Fetch API or finding a separate library to handle it. And also dynamic imports, which allows you to load only the modules that you need. And if all else fails, there are a lot of additional options available inside the next config.js file. It gives you the ability to tap into the Webpack build, as well as some other Next.js specific configurations. So we all agree that Next.js has some cool features, but who's going to address that purple butler in the room? How does Next.js compare to Gatsby? Let's dive in. So Next.js and Gatsby have a lot of similarities when it comes to page building and routing. Next.js supports a variety of methods like SSR, SSG, and ISR. Again, remember those acronyms. While static generation isn't its primary capability, it supports it pretty well. It just requires a little extra configuration in some instances compared to Gatsby. It uses a file system-based API for routing, for dynamic routing. Gatsby, on the other hand, really just supports static site generation. It has incremental build support to help speed things up, but only on Gatsby Cloud. They also recently announced that they're coming with a file system-based API like Next.js, unless they already released that. Things start to get quite different with the data layer approach, though. Next.js doesn't really have a data layer per se. It supports a few different data fetching APIs that allows devs to access data close to the pages. This is really great and provides a lot of flexibility, but not having a data layer that gracefully persists through the application like Gatsby brings its own set of challenges. Speaking of Gatsby, Gatsby's data layer is quite mature. Using GraphQL, Gatsby exposes a large API surface that lets developers source content from wherever. While that can be a learning curve for people who are new to it, it can also be really powerful once you understand it. But once sourced, it can be queried throughout the application using GraphQL. They've coined this as the content mesh, where with this funnel-like data layer, Gatsby can really bring together a large variety of sources into a single queryable data layer. Next.js and Gatsby also both bring with them a huge community. While most might have a favorite, everyone recognizes the strengths that each one of these tools can bring, and the progress that each of them have had in helping push the web forward. As far as tooling and plugins go, Next.js is a bit lacking. While the Next.js team supports a few opinionated plugin-like packages, and it also supports hooking into the Webpack build, the framework doesn't have as great of a surface to kind of plug into. While at the end of the day, it's a React application, which offers a lot of flexibility in itself. Similar to the data layer, it just makes certain aspects more challenging, like code reuse and abstraction. Gatsby, though, has a huge plugin ecosystem. It's typical to see most Gatsby projects with at least a few plugins attached to it. That's not necessarily a bad thing. There's a ton of incredibly useful plugins to help get productive, but plugin-heavy projects might just serve a different audience, which is great that we have our options. Here are also a few more things that Next.js offers that Gatsby doesn't. Of course, Gatsby doesn't provide server-side rendering as it's purely a static site generator, but Next.js also supports serverless functions, which is a great complementary feature when you're building web applications. And one of the features that I love, which we talked about earlier, is if your page is static, it treats it as such. If it doesn't see that you're requesting server-side data, it will serve that page as static, which is a performance win. These automatic optimizations are great, especially considering the possibility of future core React features built right in. And here are a few more things that Gatsby has that Next.js doesn't. The theming engine comes in pretty handy. It's an easy way to share Gatsby code between different Gatsby projects. They also have a huge catalog of integrations with other service providers. And because it's just a static site, it's very portable. It's easy to deploy anywhere as opposed to Next.js, which, unless you're using Vercel or Next on Netlify, it can require complicated infrastructure because of its server features. At the end of the day, both these tools, along with the long list of other frameworks from earlier, all have a lot of strengths that are going to help you build new web projects. Try to understand how to use a variety of them and understand their different strengths. Try to determine which one will best serve you in your next project. So let's get back to Next.js. So who's actually using this thing? In the Jamstack world, Next.js has a staggering 58.59% adoption rate. This is at least according to the Web Almanac at HTTP Archive, compared to other popular frameworks like Next, which is for Vue, and Gatsby.js, which is the second largest React framework. If you see that little star there, it's because this may include some server-side usage, or rather, it most likely does. And as you can't really tell the difference between SSR and SSG in a Next.js application by simply loading the page. And it's arguable if some of these server capabilities actually count as Jamstack. There are also some huge companies that use Next.js. Marvel, for instance, brings its world to life online with it. Hulu is probably my favorite example. It's a highly dynamic application with a pretty large user base, making it a great case of what Next.js can do. Or another favorite is Egghead.io. I'm a little biased because I'm an instructor there, but they've put together a great implementation to provide a better experience for those who are trying to learn how to code. The front end of the application is also completely open source. It's an amazing example of how a larger web project can efficiently function with modern web tech. It's also giving them the ability to work with more interactive projects, like using MDX to add things like interactive widgets in the middle of their content. So if I've convinced you by now to give Next.js a try, it doesn't really take too much to get started. If you've used Create React App before, you're probably familiar with this concept, but getting started with Next.js is as simple as running Create Next App in your terminal. Using npx or yarn, you can run Create Next App, and you're bootstrapped with a default Next.js application. Once you do, you start off with a homepage, some basic styles, and even a sample API function. Because a lot of what you do is no config, including creating new routes, you can do a whole lot with just this default starter. It's not the flashiest thing ever, but it's a really great starting point for a new application. And if you're familiar with Gatsby, you might have also used a Gatsby starter before. Next.js also has the same concept, but really the biggest difference is you pass the GitHub address as a flag to the command. Starter isn't really necessarily the official terminology of it like it is in the Gatsby world, but they function basically the same, providing the ability to start up new pre-built sites. Like here, I created a new starter that can easily get up and running with a new WordPress site. Similar to the default Create Next App, you get everything you need to spin up a basic WordPress site out of the box. That includes dynamic routes for both pages and posts. It also handles all the data querying for you. It uses WP GraphQL to make those data queries, which is really the only non-default WordPress requirement in here, as it's more flexible and straightforward to grab data from WordPress. All you really need to do is bring your own WordPress, add WP GraphQL, and plug the URL into your environment, and you immediately have a static WordPress site powered by Next.js. And if you're ready for more, luckily, there's a ton of resources available on the web. I personally have put together a bunch of tutorials together available on my YouTube channel. But given the popularity of Next.js, you can find a bunch of different resources that fit right into your learning style. The Next.js docs also do a really good job of walking you through all the different features. There's so much functionality built in that we didn't cover here, and so there's a lot to learn. And if you want to learn how to build a practical Next.js project, you can also check out my course on egghead.io, where it walks you through building an online store with Next.js. You'll learn how to use some of the React core features like hooks and the context API to create a global shopping cart. I'll also include a link in my talk notes, but you can go to colbyfayock.com/ecom. And that's it. If you want to learn more or chat about the talk, you can find me literally anywhere at Colby Fayock. You can ask questions inside of the chat, and I'll tweet out a link to the stuff you've seen here today. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, wow. Thank you, Colby. That was a great press, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I already linked to your Egghead course in the chat, and you did so in the slides too. Okay, right now we have a few questions that have been stacking up in the questions tab. of live storm. So I figured we'd go through them just right away. If anything Snipcart related pops up, Charles, if you want to come back on stage, that's great. If not, no biggie. Some people were asking if all of the discussion will be available afterwards, and the answer is yes. So we're recording this live stream, and then we'll be using it on YouTube and whatnot to share it with the community for all of the peeps who are interested but couldn't attend. Shall we go through the questions from the oldest? Okay, let's do it. Okay, the first one is from me. All right, I wanted to touch on SEO with Next.js. So I know some people are maybe confused about the difference between the static bits of the Next app versus the dynamic bits. And then can Google really crawl JavaScript and the whole thing. So if you have any kind of input for the listeners and the community, we're all ears.
Sure. So yeah, this is a can of worms, right? So to start off, the whole JavaScript's does Google crawl JavaScript? And the answer is yes. It might be limited because ultimately it's probably a low-powered robot that's going to visit your site, right? But it does recognize some JavaScript. But ultimately, if you can get that page with the initial set of data, even if it does support JavaScript, you're still looking at other search engines, and it might not support all the features that you want out of the, or rather, if you're not providing all that content directly to the initial request, it still might miss some things that take too long to load with JavaScript. So speaking of the frameworks, whether you're using server-side rendering or static generation, really, as long as your best bet is going to be to send all those, the SEO data, like the meta tags or the page content, your best bet will to send that in the initial request if you can. The way I like to do things, I like to go kind of static first, just because when you go static first, there's a lot of things you don't have to kind of worry about and think about until you actually need to load the server-side data.
Yeah, true. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, if some folks are interested in digging more into single-page apps and JavaScript frameworks plus SEO, we got a great resource on our site. So maybe Ludo, if you're hearing me, you can drop that in the chat. And let's just move on to the next one then. Oh, Charles. Okay, I'm gonna ask yours then. Do you explain what Next is to clients? And if so, how do you go about it?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So in my experience with past work, we never really explained to clients what frameworks we were using or what tools. So just as an example, we never actually used the term Jamstack when we were describing applications. We were telling them that we were going to give them a dynamic web application, and maybe we told them that it would be stored in static storage on S3, but we didn't give them such fine details. Now that said, I know a lot of people have completely varying experiences from that, where some clients will go out specifically to ask if you can build a Next.js application, if you can build a Jamstack application. So I think that's client dependent, and it's good to try to gear your answers and how you're describing your products depending on the type of client that you actually have.
True. Yeah, true. The level of interest and literacy when it comes to web technologies, it just varies so much, right? So it depends.
Some people, some businesses ultimately might just care that you're giving a reliable application and that it's not going to cost them that much to maintain, which, a Jamstack application provides you that. Do they care what framework you use? Maybe not.
Yeah.
And they're also pretty cheap to host and to run too, compared to having a huge server too.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is the stuff, business benefits or business cons that can resonate easily with clients. So sometimes when you want to describe a technology, you just want to weave these benefits in the more business side of things. Remember when you had that old website that was hosted on XYZ place and it cost you X per month? Well, with these new types of apps, we can manage to pull off 10x less in hosting costs and that kind of stuff. Sometimes when you speak that lingo, it can be more interesting for clients.
Yeah. And then if they ask you what framework are you using, go ahead and tell them.
Yeah.
But like, you can, what is that term? Like, you can do yourself a disfavor if you go in swinging with all these latest frameworks where you might confuse the client and, ultimately set yourself up for failure. But
yeah, for sure. Okay. I got a few ideas about this whole topic, but we'll go through the questions that people asked. So Leah, who's she works with us at Snipcart, asking, being that Vercel made Next, is it easier to deploy a Next app on their platform than on Netlify or anywhere else?
Mm-hmm. It's absolutely easier because they're always going to be providing the latest feature sets that Next.js has. For instance, like it's arguably just as easy to deploy a Next.js site on Netlify with their build plugin, the Next on Netlify build plugin, but it does lack some features. So it depends on if you care about some of those features that they don't support, which I don't know what that list looks like, but for just a standard Jamstack application, they're going to provide most of those features for you.
Yeah. It's such a popular tool in the ecosystem. It just wouldn't make business sense for other platforms to adapt to it, for sure.
Yeah, and I think like if for especially developers, like they're both giving you pretty generous free tiers. So like at that point, you kind of might as well go with Vercel until you start hitting that limit that you want to actually, think about your options.
I saw that Vercel had some like serverless functions available through their Vercel system. Is it working like with Next or it's something like not related?
So my understanding is like that all feeds into Vercel, and like they have very specific like deployment for that. I don't know all the fine details in that, but like just as another example, the Next.js image component, that's actually server side based. It's not they don't generate static files. So I don't know if Netlify supports that one, but Next.js or Vercel rather, since they're developing those features for Next.js, will support it out of the box.
Right. Cool. So next one is from Brent Robbins. Here we go. How do you explain or sell the differences and benefits between Next.js versus Gatsby?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are kind of pushing towards the idea that Gatsby does a really great job at static generation. And that's not saying that Next.js doesn't, but the fact that you have a lot of powerful APIs on that data layer that you can really push out, creating a lot of those pages, especially pulling them into different sources into that GraphQL API. There's a lot of power in that, where like if you want to be more flexible and have more power and control over the application, Next.js might be your best bet. And again, to touch on the Gatsby part, like they have a wider ecosystem of plugins. So that's going to provide you with a lot of easier options for getting up and running with certain things like sourcing headless CMS content.
Okay, gotcha. And then would you say that it is a fair statement to say something like Gatsby is more beginner friendly than Next.js?
So that's tricky to me. I think it is overall, but I think there's a little bit of a learning curve and barrier of entry with the GraphQL API. And the reason I say that is, at least for like my personal experience and people I've always talked to, is like some of the starters that you jump into have this big GraphQL interface all over the site. And like, if you don't know what GraphQL is, that's a little intimidating. So like, that's, I think really the most difficult thing about kind of getting up to speed on Gatsby if you're not familiar with it. But if you know GraphQL already, that's a big win.
Yeah, and then you can also leverage the whole like community, like you said. They're investing so much in education, and documentation, and open source, and
like honestly, like a lot of people can probably build sites with literally just plugins, and like some people, some people might look at that as a bad thing and look down upon those kind of things. But there's something really powerful about that you can get so productive with performant applications by being able to do that, right?
Charles?
But I find that like all the plugins, the themes, the starters for Gatsby, that's like pretty confusing. There's so many options that it's not very clear what each option does. But
I think
that's just me.
I would make that, like, it's weird because we're sponsoring Gatsby Conf tomorrow.
Yeah.
But like we really like the tool, of course, and we developed the team recently because they released the team just functionality, and our crude understanding in the beginning was like, oh, we'll get some UI components that are already styled and positioned and everything, and it wasn't that at all. Like a team for Gatsby is much more focused on the functionality that can be imported like this into a site, and then that functionality lives agnostic from a specific project, and you can push it in all of these, right? It's super interesting. But like Charles said, I think that if you do the things right, like you go on gatsbyjs.com and then you get started documentation, and I would bet like a lot of money that going through what they're telling you, you go, okay, I get it. I get it. It's just that we're always in a rush and trying to do stuff, and we come from here, and then we come from here. So maybe we're confused a bit by this.
Yeah, and it's also a little bit easier if you know what you're looking for, right? Like if I come into building a Gatsby application, and I know I want to create, I want to use Sanity or Graph CMS as my headless CMS. Like I know that I can look for Gatsby plugin CMS name, right? But if I don't know what I'm looking for, like there's a huge community of CMS. So like, first of all, I have to understand what those are. And you know, it's interesting.
I mean, we often say that we're kind of blessed because we have a cool community, and some people are developing third-party stuff. You know, Colby, you've seen some of them, like plugins, and Gatsby plugins is a good example. So we've had like 3 different people working on some 3 different projects, and then other people were interested in Gatsby and Snipcart would come in and say, okay, which one should I pick? Which one's the official? And then they would write to us, and then we would write to the plugin creator, and this one is done. And so yeah, sometimes that volume and accessibility can be confusing when you're trying to just pick a clear thing that you need.
Absolutely.
Cool. Moving on. What do we have next? That's not a good one.
Got to bring out the puns.
Yeah. What headless CMS would you recommend for Next? And that is Alexander.
Yeah, good question.
I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing it correctly.
And I don't think there's really like, this isn't the answer you probably want to hear, but I don't think there's really like one great answer for that, because there's just such a wide variety of CMS options now that like there's so many different things that each has a little bit different way of doing things, that it really depends on what you're trying to do. For instance, like if you already have a client that's on WordPress, that can be really powerful because they don't need to relearn a new tool. You're just taking the data from WordPress and creating a new site with it. Brent, on the other hand, said that Sanity works great. It absolutely does. Sanity is super powerful, and it has a lot of great developer tools that helps like developers get productive with it, and things like adding it to their deployment cycles and stuff with their CLI. It's just, there's such a big market out there of headless CMS options out there. It unfortunately just takes a little bit of research and trying around with things and seeing what you like.
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking with some of the biggest players in the space for months now. Just me trying to wrap my head around the different positioning and feature set and scale of project and everything. And I can tell you for a fact that like, so if you only want to decouple the back end from the front end, like almost any of them will do the job, right? And it's going to be great. Then I think I'm actually in the process of writing a piece about this, like the difference between a headless CMS and a structured content platform, like Sanity like to position themselves. So I think what you need to do is always balance DX, so your fun, right, and client experience. So a big error that you can make is going like, oh geez, the Grok thing at Sanity, I can query everything in the portable text, and wow, and I love it. But then your client, on the other hand, maybe needs just a simple thing that they don't have. Probably not. It's just a random example, and then you picked wrong, right? So yeah, I'll follow up with that piece I'm writing, and hopefully it can help.
And I think that's a great point because I feel like a lot of the headless CMS solutions in the Jamstack community really started off focusing on the developer experience only, which, that's a great thing. It's a great way to get support from developers. But ultimately, most of the time, unless you're building a portfolio site or something like that, like you're ultimately delivering that headless CMS to a customer, right? And if, just like your point, if that customer isn't having a great experience, then that customer is not going to be happy with your work.
Yeah, and then Brent added something that I like. Like he said, if you just need data and not necessarily like a UI to manage the content of a website specifically, you can use something like Ashura. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but you have so you could use Sanity in the same way. By the way, you could use Directus in the same way, and these are the players I'm going to be looking at in the piece I was mentioning about. Something else like, all right, this is our webinar, so I'm just going to say it because like it's Snipcart's webinar. And we really like bootstrapped companies, independent players in this space. We are independent and bootstrap, and we're proud of it. And Dato CMS, they are too. They have a similar origin story. Vercel actually used them to manage the content behind Next.js Conf. So like they made a great product that's competing with all of these other beautiful products, but from a bootstrap vintage point, which is, resources are a bit more scarce when you do it that way.
I played around with Dato a little bit, and they have a really great product. I think the only reason that I didn't go with them is just because for what I needed out of a pricing model, it just didn't support that at the time because I wasn't selling it to a client. But they had a really great product.
Yeah, it's cool. And they just released structured text, which is amazing. So yeah, you should check these folks out. And then the usual suspects that we hear nowadays are Sanity, Strappy, Contentful, Dato, and I'm forgetting some, and some will tell me.
Joshua said it. Agility, GraphCMS.
Yeah, Agility. They've been investing a lot in the Jamstack ecosystem. There's a lot.
I think the interesting thing with Next.js, I don't think there's a particularly like a specific CMS that works good for Next.js because like where with Gatsby, you have your source plugins, right? And that's probably the primary way for you to interface with that into Gatsby. Where with Next.js, whatever CMS you choose, ultimately you're going to have to manually request that data, whether it's through a GraphQL API or a REST endpoint. So really there's nothing that I've seen that there's something special about going for a specific CMS for Next.js.
Yeah, if you're on a budget or you need to save time, you might want to go through these cool headless CMSs, check out the starters, and see if like they already have the kind of project you want to build, right? And it could save you like loads of time and save money to your client. And most of them have starters with Next.js, so maybe that's an entry point for your decision here. It really depends.
Absolutely. And the cool thing is like a lot of them have generous free tiers, right? So you can go on there and test it out. Like I remember when I was trying to choose CMS for spacejelly.dev, like I opened up a bunch of accounts because I wanted to see how the interface felt because I'm in particular, I want a UI like a client does. I don't want to have like a developer UI. So I wanted to make sure that like I was having a good experience. And,
what did you pick?
I ended up going with WordPress. So for me, it's the reason I did is because I think it still has a great editing experience, and I can do a lot of the modifications of like custom post types and stuff right inside of WordPress. Where I personally don't want to maintain another code base for my CMS. That's just me.
That's fine. And so that's the store where you sell your own swag and your jelly emblem and the space jelly guy, and that's it.
So that's part of it. I also have like articles up on there now, but Yeah.
And what are you using to sell that swag?
Oh, I'm using an awesome product called Snipcart.
Oh my God! What a coincidence! Who could have seen this one coming?
nice slob.
All right, I'm done promoting our own stuff. Let's move on to the next. What do we have?
No, but I know like that's not the intent, but I love using Snipcart because it's just so easy to drop into projects. Like, and it doesn't matter if it's a Jamstack or a serverful application. It's just easy to drop into projects.
Yeah, that's what we try our best to make it work. All right, next one is from Charles. Charles, you're asking Colby, how good is the TypeScript support with Next.js?
So I'm not gonna lie, I haven't gotten too much on the TypeScript bandwagon yet, but from what I understand, like it's built in by default, and my understanding is that it's completely supported, but again, I don't have personal experience with it.
Okay.
Gotcha.
If anyone in the chat has some input on that, we can do a async, come back to that question, whatever. We're gonna move on.
It's listed as one of the features on their site, so I would imagine that it has good support.
So it's great, yeah. Okay. Then Koji Kanao asks us, Next.js supports SSG, static site generation. Should we use static site generation instead of static site rendering, SSR? I will just add to this, can we use both and should we use both to let you answer that?
Yeah, and I told you earlier you need to be up on your acronyms game, but the way that I typically approach things is I like to go static first. And the reason I like to do that is because just in my head, like if I have a static file on somewhere that's getting served, I don't have to think about a lot of things. I don't have to think about how it scales and like if I'm gonna have trouble hitting like those APIs like directly from the page. Now that said, that's not a great option for a lot of use cases. Like one example is like e-commerce, where if I have 10 products on my website, maybe I can live with each of those pages compiling out every single time. But if I have like thousands, millions of products, like I'm not going to want that to happen each time, where it might be better to go with like a server-side approach where it can always dynamically hit a route and see if that product exists and then return it. Now, as I mentioned in the talk, there's also the hybrid approach where you can use the ISR or incremental static regeneration, which it's essentially static site generation, but it provides a mechanism where it's refreshing in the background. So I like to kind of joke that we're kind of coming full circle with static or serverful solutions, because really it's similar to how you would expect like a really hard caching layer in front of a serverful website, right? Where like you have that serverful site on whatever serverful language you want to choose, but then you have a caching layer on a CDN, and that every so often fetches from the origin. So really you're providing the same kind of mechanism with that. But that said, like it gives you the best of both worlds.
Scale and filtering and states, and that's the kind of stuff you want to ask it. The more complexity, the more different states, the more like dynamic filtering and whatever, the more I think you can make use of server-side rendering. But yeah, I think we won't get into the weeds, but if you're to do both, I think Next.js is a very good pick.
Absolutely. I mean, simply, Gatsby can't, right? So like you would have to, I don't even know what you do. You have to go find a serverful solution, I guess. I'm not sure, but.
All right. What's next? We got one more. Sam.
I think that's a question for me.
Oh, go get it. Yeah.
Yeah. So someone wants to know how to integrate Snipcart with authorized.net. He says that there's no easy connect. Oh, I think I know why. I mean, to use authorized.net, you have to start by filling your profile business address in the profile section of a dashboard, because authorized.net is not available for every countries. I think it only works in Canada and the US. So you have to input that first, your billing address, and then you're going to have the connect button beside the authorized.net logo.
Sam just went in the chat and said, you guys can ignore this. Leah just saved me from my stupidity. It's not stupidity.
Thanks,
if you couldn't find it like this, it's on us to up our documentation and onboarding game, and not on. So listen, let me see. I had some. Okay, I had a few. Do we have? Yeah, we can do 5 minutes more, I think. Yeah. So everybody is still here. If you have questions about Snipcart, go for it. If you don't have any questions about Snipcart, that's fine. Questions to Colby, Next, whatever you want to throw at us in the last 5 minutes, let's do it. Colby, I have one that I don't know if you're going to be able to answer. Maybe Charles can help you, but would you say that Next.js really is like a one-for-one view alternative for Next.js, or not quite?
Yeah, I don't know that answer. I still haven't really dove into Vue.js that much.
Okay, gotcha. It's perfect.
Yeah. I don't think that it's a one-to-one alternative. I mean, they don't have like the exact same features and stuff like that, but you can basically do the same kind of applications with Next that you could do with Next, and you can do like static site generation and stuff like that as well.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Cool. Okay, I got would you say, Colby, would you say some projects are too small for Next?
In my opinion, no. So I think this is tricky because, in my opinion, anytime I like to start up a project, I just default to Next.js. And I know some people would be out there and say, why don't you use 11D or use something like that? And it's just, I know I can be really productive and knock something out really quickly with Next.js. So like, I know the fact that they're putting a lot of performance benefits on the backside of that, like things I don't have to worry about or think about, I know that I can just build an app really quickly with it. But like the correct answer is like there's definitely some other options. Like Svelte, I know, provides some really lean applications for simpler applications. It's just, I haven't spent a lot of time getting comfortable with it. So again, it's like kind of what you're comfortable with it, as long as you're not providing negative performance experiences.
And like that's like, so if you want to start to learn to ski, right? You can spend literally months shopping like different skis and brands, and when you do fixations like this, I think you should go with this and this one. But at the end of the day, you gotta get on some skis and get downhill, right? So if you manage to get downhill and do some nice curves and stuff, and you're at the end of the slope and you're feeling great, well, maybe you don't have to do all of the skis, right? So sometimes I feel like developers would get caught in the weeds of like, wait, no, you shouldn't be building with this. You should be building with that. And at the end of the day, you should be building. And that's pretty much it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's interesting because like I actually see like Next.js and Gatsby as a great way to learn React. And the reason is there's a lot of things that you don't have to think about or worry about as a new developer into the React ecosystem. Like it has the file system based routing, so you don't have to worry about like, how do I create new pages? Like, because you don't get that out of the box with Create Next app, those kind of things. So like you can focus on like the minimal amount of HTML and then start layering on the JavaScript as you start to learn things, which I think is nice.
And it pairs well with the project-driven learning approach, right? With Gatsby and Next, you can spin up something real quick, and then you want to add some funky, like dynamic component that's driving data from somewhere else. Oh, maybe you get into React. Like so there's this vibe that you can use to learn. I like this,
especially Gatsby, because we're going back to like the plugins. So like if like you don't really have to know how that connection between a CMS and Gatsby works. All you need to know is if you put in this plugin and configure it with your API key, that you're going to be able to have that content right inside of your app.
So we got a question. Charles, you want to hit us?
Yep. Can you tell us something about the developers portal coming up for Snipcart? Yeah, this is something that we were talking about for a while now, but this is not something that we start working on yet. This is something we really want to do. We wish we could start working on that before the end of the year. But as many of you might know, at the moment, the team focus is the subscriptions feature. And then we have like some refactoring to do. We want to implement an integration with the ShipStation or Shippo to help merchants manage their store once they're up and running with Snipcart, with like shipping labels and stuff like that. So I think that the developers portal will come like after that.
Yeah, it's always hard for us to answer that because there's beauty and fun and proximity and being bootstrapped and just our small team of talented people that we were very tight, and that's cool, but we have to be very, very careful about what we say yes to and what we decide as a team is essential or can wait a little. And so it's heartbreaking. Like literally sometimes we have people who've been following us for years asking us for one thing. And in the beginning, there was no traction, no product, no company, almost nothing. So we could say yes to a bunch of things and try things out. But now it's not the case anymore. Like we have to maintain a good product, a good business, something that's scalable, something that's healthy. And sometimes it means saying no, not now, to some stuff like this. Yeah,
it's important to be able to prioritize.
Yeah, it is. So okay, we ran for an hour. I think I would keep it like I would wrap things up right now because I feel like we've covered a lot. It's our first one. I haven't said anything too stupid yet, so it's a good time to
we better stop now.
quit while you're ahead or something like that. Let's see. There's Gavin typing something. If it's a cool last question, we can squeeze it in. Oh, thanks, guys. Perfect. You're empowering us to quit. Okay, so Ludo, my puppet master in the shadows of Livestorm. What should I do now? Should I just like leave the room, or maybe I leave the stage, or maybe I don't know. I don't know what to do. Let me see here. Let me try to see the UI.
Should we say bye before he cuts us all off?
Oh yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks everybody for checking out and listening.
Bye. Thanks all.
We'll do another one.